Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for joining us. This is episode 9. So this is Monica Stahl. She leads worship at Radiant Church in Visalia, and we've really been able to, as a church, enjoy her leadership in these last few months as she's helping us to equip worship leaders and develop a worship culture. So Monica, it's just, first of all, we've known Monica for like at least 15 years, I guess, maybe more than that. Let's see. Yeah, probably about 15 years personally. So um,
A lot of love.
it's just, that's really cool to have such longevity, and thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So would you just start, you've been a worship leader as long as I've known you, leading in some way. You've been up on stage singing and stuff, but kind of just give us like the short version of like how long you've been in your current role, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Dates, not sure. Sorry, but I've been leading
Roughly.
at Radiant probably since 2011,
Okay.
10 or 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was on the mission field with music group, and so I've done that.
Yeah, and you were with Celebrant Singers, right?
Yeah. So missions and worship have always been like a big part of my heart and something I have a lot of vision for. And I have always been like on stage as a worship person. And then it was, around 2009 that something really started to shift and change, I think, in my heart and in my sound of worship that came from a place of greater freedom that I'd experienced. And from that point, it was like doors kind of started to open, things started to shift. And I would get calls to like lead worship for events when I'd never done that before. I'm like, how'd you get my name and why do you think I can do this?
Wow.
But God started really just like developing something in me through the work that he'd done in my heart that just invoked a different worship.
Yeah.
And so
what would you say? Because I know, kind of backtracking, but I think it's kind of an important thing because I do get the question from worship leaders, or like the conversation with some worship leaders is this tension between like worship leading isn't just performing, but you had a background, like what you have even in your Celebrant background was more of a performing background. And then you also were a singer-songwriter, recorded some music on your own. So like, for you, like what's the, how would you like speak to that difference between performing music, even Christian music, or even worship music, like with Celebrants, you're singing songs about God.
Yes.
And then leading worship.
Yeah.
How did you grow from one to the next?
I think performance, I think these songs that we sung in Celebrants,
Yeah.
they have a beginning and they have an end, and there's an order and we go through it. So it could fall more into a performance sort of mindset. But I really do, especially if we're talking in terms of the biblical expression of worship versus performance for people.
Yeah.
That's just totally a heart posture.
Yeah.
And, whether it's like songs I've written or it's like a gig that someone has booked or something, myself or anyone, it really is like the posture of your heart, of how you're engaging with the Lord in what you're singing and what you're saying. And that's probably like, as far as growing up with that heart of worship, that was one of my first markers of recognizing like meaning what I say, it matters, and how my heart is postured matters. We had moved to like a little church in Tehachapi. I was 15.
Okay.
Didn't know many people. It was like one lady on the piano, one lady on the organ, and I'm going on a Sunday night. And there was just a prayer in me that said, I want to mean everything I say.
Right.
And I recognize like the effectiveness of engaging our will in really meaning what we say.
Yeah, like what do you, because that's something that I've experienced trouble with, like occasionally. And I think I've heard others, like maybe friends even talk about, so maybe if we could just stop like on that point, like meaning, I think we do, it seems good and right that we do want to mean what we say. What do you think about when you're not sure if you mean what you're singing and how to...
Because we want to be authentic.
Yeah. What's the classic song, like, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul...
That is the song.
Really?
That is the song they sang that night.
Okay. Tell me.
This is awesome. Okay, So I show up and it's like they're on the organ, they're on the piano, and they start to sing in King James Version, Old English.
Oh, wow.
As the deer panteth for the water,
okay.
so my soul longeth after thee.
Yeah.
And what happened in me in that resolve to mean what I say and bring something real to the Lord and not just go through the motions was I recognized this is not necessarily true of me. I wouldn't have penned these words in this moment. I'm not like a deer panting, desperately longing for God. However, because of my posture and my will to engage with the Lord in a meaningful worship, I was able to recognize the true longing in my heart for God alone. And that he alone could satisfy. And another thing I remembered happening was I engaged it as a real prayer of my heart for that to become more real in my life.
Right. So
And
you're singing, you're singing this, but you're also kind of praying its meaning. Like you're like, and I think that music does have a way. I think I may have had this conversation with you where sometimes when I'm setting up a service, I'll like want the songs to match the theme of but then I think I told you this, or maybe it was my wife, where sometimes I think that the worship it preaches its own sermon, and that's a little bit like what you're saying is this idea how, the words that we sing are like, they're edifying ourselves. They're building ourselves up. They're encouraging us into truth. Like what I hear you saying is you're reflecting, like, does my soul pant after the Lord? Like, like a thirsty deer. And then like, oh, soul, like I want that. I want, so you're almost preaching to yourself as you're singing. Oh, wow. That's crazy because that is the song where I'm like, man, sometimes I'm like, do I need you on that level, Lord?
And the truth is, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's finding yourself in that reality that we just go, we drift away from this actual reality that our soul, our mind, maybe not, our schedule, maybe not, but in reality, our soul is like, give me Jesus. Give me the living water,
So what would that have church culture been like? Because this is one of the things I wanted to chat with you about. We all kind of have our different background growing up. I grew up in a Mennonite Brethren home where we loved music at the church. People sang from their hearts, but it was very stoic, so like the demonstrative worship was something that I've grown into over the years, really the last 15 or so probably. But for you, like that, you're describing a worship experience. What was the culture of worship that you grew up into?
Yeah. So, like I was saying, there's one lady on piano, one lady on organ.
Yeah.
So
that's the way we did it.
Yeah. But it was also a church that did pursue like spiritual gifts, worshiping in spirit and in truth. And we believed in tongues and for the prophetic and those gifts operating within the service. So there were words of knowledge. This was Assemblies of God is the church I grew up in. Yeah. And so that was something that was normal. And I even have kind of recognized recently when I was little, I would go to the altar and pray for people. And I recognized like no one ever like gave me permission. Nobody told me not to. Nobody gave me permission to or asked me to do it. But I guess I think there was a sense of permission, like to move, to be led by something of the spirit that would be loving towards someone or in line with like what God was saying and doing. So there definitely was that sort of culture of like being moved by love or a scripture or a word or towards someone or towards the Lord in an expressive way for sure.
What does it mean to worship? Like how would you define worship, in your experience and your like when you sit down to lead people, what is the thing that you're leading people into?
The way I would define worship is a wholehearted offering of love and trust to God. The word worship means to bow down. That's what it means. It's plain and simple. It's bowing to his lordship. And so we see that the first mention of worship and the first mention of love are in that chapter when Abraham takes Isaac to the altar. And it says, wait here while we go worship, and Yeah, and then God refers to the Son as the Son that he loves. Those are the first two mentions of that. And so this is the picture of worship, first picture we see of worship. It's a wholehearted offering of love and trust, massive trust to the Lord that he barely even knows. He's just getting to know. And so that to me is the definition I've adopted based off of that scripture and the one I most resonate with.
Yeah. So, okay. So in there, you've got the idea of, this trusting relationship with God where there's obedience following, like hearing from God, obeying, hearing from God, obeying. There's also this element of, you mentioned sacrifice, but there's legitimately like a ritual element of our worship.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's where we enter into the conversation about, okay, so what is the worship that, so then what to you? So like you're describing a way of living, really, first and foremost. So now, like, let's take that into the church gathering. You're playing the piano. So what version of, how would you relate that to what we're doing as we sing towards God?
Yeah. Well, I think so we all come with our own relationship and we all come with what the Lord's asking of us.
Yeah.
And that's what we bring.
Yeah.
And, I think too of like the first mention of praise too. It's from like a response of God's deliverance. That's the first mention of praise. Song of Moses, Song of Miriam, boom, they like burst out in praise. And so I think that, so how do we come in worship corporate setting? That was your question. So I think it's both of those things. I think laying things on the altar, if we recognize that is worship, it helps us to then engage in song.
Right.
Because I think that's where we can kind of get hung up is on our idols and on our stuff that we love and the stuff that we're comfortable with. But if we're able to recognize, that we're bringing an offering. You bring your offering, I bring my offering. You have your hangups, I have my hangups. You have your idol. We're laying that down to worship him. So I think it's both and. And I think the corporate song is a very special way of engaging everyone together in agreement of who our God is and what he's worthy of.
I mean, I guess my experience in corporate worship is like that has that sense of like, kind of encouraging one another to like make the whatever the thing is, and this we're talking about putting our eyes towards the Lord, but we're kind of the singing has this role where it's like pushing us towards or adjusting our gaze towards, or it's encouraging us together in our worship, our proclamation of God.
That's a lot of the New Testament mentions are encouraging one another, psalms, hymns, spiritual song. That's a lot of the reference. Almost some of the only reference of song is both in laying down our lives, the Lord, for each other, encouraging each other in this way,
So so what we're doing corporately then, would it be fair to say like what you're saying seems to be that what we're doing corporately is we're encouraging one another into this like putting God in his rightful place by saying true things about him, by like pouring our hearts towards him in such a way that the response of our lives will mirror the response of our mouths in song and lead us towards obedient living, lead us towards the things that he's called us into. I guess where I'm going next is how would you encourage the person, or what would you say to the person who's not sure they want to get their body involved?
Well, I think we need a lot of encouragement.
Yeah.
Because we are so used to taking our social cues for everything that we do. And we don't take our social cue. We don't worship off of social cues. We take our cues from the word. We take our cues from, like I've mentioned, Song of Moses, Song of Miriam. We take our cues from David. We take our cues from the elders and the saints and those that have seen him and know him. That's where we take our cues, and we don't have to wonder what kind of worship he requires. It's clear. And if you want to know more, you can know more. If you want to understand more, you can understand what these words mean of praise and stuff. But we do need a lot of encouragement because it's not comfortable. It's not. I was leading worship with some young people today, and I was like, you can't categorize this into any other, like there's no other love, there's no other relationship, there's no other thing that invokes this kind of response.
Yeah.
And so stop trying to put it in a category of a way that you do anything else.
Yeah.
He's like no one else.
Right.
We worship him like nothing else.
Yeah.
And there's something that if we can say okay to that and let go of some of those hindrances, encouraging one another to do that, then we can experience unity and worship in a different way. And I will say, like, unity, it's not, it matters that you show up. It matters you put your voice in the room. Unity is not, we're in a room together. That does not mean we're in unity. And especially in worship, there's one thing that brings us into unity, and that is Jesus.
Yeah.
It's we're all looking at Jesus. Yes. That's what's going to bring us into unity. And I think, sometimes, for as much as I love and believe corporate worship, and I mean, I could go for hours and hours talking about how powerful it is and how God moves and how he shows up and how we need it. Sometimes it can be a disservice, the sung worship, because we go away thinking that we've worshiped when maybe we haven't. It's like, oh, I participated in worship because I was in the room where songs were being sung, and I believe them and I agree with them. I've participated in worship. But did you worship? Like, what was the posture of your heart? Which obviously we can't judge that for anyone. But praise looks like something. And never in scripture does it look like standing there and looking around at other things. Not to judge anyone's heart, because sometimes there's stuff going on that we don't see, and there's like a lot of engagement. But on the whole, as a social norm and what's acceptable, it's like, do less. I push myself in that place because I want to lead from that place of knowing, hey, we're bringing an offering and laying our lives down or laying our pride down. I mean, ego cannot abide with like worship to God at the same time.
I have so much I just have a lot to say about that, I suppose. But it reminds me of the story where David's dancing. The ark has come home and he's dancing, and Saul's daughter Michal is like, that's undignified behavior, how you're behaving is undignified. And David's like, I'll become even more undignified than this. There's something about the foolishness of it. Like it's like, because the foolishness of it, to your point, just tends to, it's humiliating, which I think, he must increase, I must decrease, right? If you're in this setting, you're feeling uncomfortable, okay, I know Monica and Noel, like you're right. The Bible does say to clap. It does say to kneel. It does say to dance. Like I see it, but I feel uncomfortable. One thing that I would suggest is that there's others around you that also feel uncomfortable. And like there's something about like just turning the ratio in a gathering towards like a ratio that is promoting expressiveness, and things get less uncomfortable so like I think that's literally one of the ways that we encourage one another is by if I lay down my preferences, if I lay down my comfort, it encourages the person next to me to lay down their preferences and their comfort. And I mean, really, a life of following God is, like, I'm sorry if you're not comfortable, I don't know if I'm sorry, but I get that. That. But like the whole life of following God is really about like laying down our comforts in so many different ways. Not at almost like demonstration in worship is just like one of many.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. We could totally talk about this for hours, right?
Yes.
Maybe maybe we'll have a chance to do it again. Thanks so much for coming and just talking a little bit about worship. And I've enjoyed just hearing your heart and learning from you. I loved your story at the beginning, the deer panted for water story.
That's awesome.
Maybe there's many of us who have been in that spot. But hey, thanks for joining us, Monica. Thanks for loving the church. Thanks for loving the Lord and leading us towards worship.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.